Next on our program, we're delighted to have a terrific keynote speaker to formally launch the new Balsillie School of International Affairs. And I would like to ask my friend and colleague, Tad Homer-Dixon, to come up and give a proper introduction to Dr. Timothy Wirth. Tad.
Well, what an extraordinary evening this is. I don't know about all of you. I mean, so many people here have worked so hard to make this school a reality. But I'm absolutely ecstatic. This is a remarkable accomplishment. And I think, as David suggested early on, we really deserve to congratulate ourselves to bringing this institution to fruition. I'd also very much like to offer my own heartfelt thanks to Jim for making this possible. He had a vision, and he made it possible. And there will be amazing things, I'm sure, that come out of this school. People and ideas which will change the world and make it better in very many ways for our children and grandchildren. And that is an extraordinary contribution to posterity and to the future. Now, when we were talking about who might be appropriate to invite as a keynote speaker, the first person who came to my mind was Tim Wirth. And I've been very fortunate to have known Tim for quite some time, since 1994, I believe, and Ren Wirth since about, I guess, the year 2000. And they've always, for me, epitomized what I would regard as the true global citizen. People who are profoundly concerned about the state of humankind and mobilize their own and others' resources to really make a difference, to better our world. And for me, they've always been something of role models in thinking about how I can contribute to the world to make it a better place. Now, Tim Wirth's bio is very extensive, and I'm going to read just a few excerpts this evening. He's a graduate of Harvard and Stanford University, where he received a PhD in education. He's now, as you know, the president of the United Nations Foundation and the Better World Fund. He began his political career as a White House fellow under President Lyndon Johnson and served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Education in the Nixon Administration. In 1970, Wirth returned to his home state of Colorado and successfully ran for the House of Representatives in 1974. He was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1986, where he focused on just the issues that are at the core of our concerns at the Balsillie School and at CG. He focused on environmental issues, particularly global climate change and population stabilization. In 1988, he organized the historic Hansen hearings in the Senate of the United States on climate change, hearings that had a very profound effect on my own career. And with his close friend, the late Senator John Hines, he authored Project 88, outlining the groundbreaking cap-and-trade idea, which was later incorporated in the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. He chose not to run for re-election in 1992, and following the 2 decades in elected politics, he became co-chair of the Clinton-Gore campaign from 1993 to 1997. Of the Clinton-Gore campaign, and then from 1993 to 1997, he served in the U.S. Department of State as the first Undersecretary of Global Affairs. He helped organize U.S. foreign policy in that capacity in the area of refugees, population, environment, science, human rights, and narcotics. He chaired the United States delegation at the 1994 Cairo Conference on Population and Development, and was the lead negotiator for the United States at the Kyoto Climate Conference. He resigned from the administration in 1997 to accept Ted Turner's invitation to be president of the newly created United Nations Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Timothy Wirth.
Well, Tad, thank you very much, and to all of you, thank you for coming this evening and for allowing me to join you at the grand opening of this wonderful, wonderful school. Jim, congratulations, and it's a real honor for me to be here. Tad Homer Dixon is an old friend, and we've hosted him in Washington and admired for a long time his fine work. Tad, thank you very much for your good introduction. I listened to Davy Johnson up here. What he didn't mention was that I did have the privilege of serving on the Harvard board for a number of years, and David was the chairman. And he is the most gentle and persuasive individual as chairman of a very, very complex institution. I have enormous admiration for him, and he's, I think, one of the loveliest people that I know. So it was a real pleasure to have that nice set of comments from him. And as I would say, as a devoted and dedicated user of the classic BlackBerry device, I know that Jim has helped to create one of the universal tools of our interconnected world. And now, through the creation of this school, he's helped to cultivate the ideas and brain power needed to understand and manage our interconnected globe. In his own words, this school will truly be the vibrant sanctuary. Jim Balsillie's words, the vibrant sanctuary. It's a wonderful description of what a great school should be. We need this school and its graduates at this critical moment in history when international cooperation and global governance are more important than ever before. Tonight, I want to talk about two numbers, 8 and 2. And of course, I want to talk about the UN. But first, some background. As Tad pointed out, 20 years ago, President Clinton asked me to serve as the first U.S. Undersecretary for Global Affairs, overseeing a broad array of U.S. foreign policy on issues like oceans, the environment and science, population, refugees, international narcotics, and crime. One of my friends called the position the Undersecretary for all of the above. I often thought of it as the Undersecretary for impossible problems. President Clinton created this new global affairs position as a catchment for so many of the soft issues that the neglected stepchildren in the portfolios of real diplomats. Like other foreign ministries around the world, the U.S. State Department has always been organized around bilateral relationships. The assumption has always been that peace and prosperity could be assured by establishing and maintaining collegial one-to-one relationships with the nations of the world. When a relationship gets bumpy, pressure is carefully applied until transgressors get back in line. It's a very traditional, even quite quaint perspective on international relations. But this traditional stovepipe organization, primarily constructed on bilateral relationships, ignores the reality of much of today's world. Bilateral political problems seldom occur within a single state. Increasingly, they are a function of cross-boundary challenges: drought, climate change, human rights abuses, hunger, population pressures, the challenges that former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called problems without passports. These new global challenges will be the stuff of the Balsillie School curriculum and will frame the careers of the school's graduates. Yours is a world in which the economic flu in one part of the world affects jobs and financial forecasts in every region. Rapid population growth in the world's poorest countries undermines development and puts migratory pressures on the entire world. And it doesn't matter whatsoever if coal is burned in Toronto or Tokyo. The resulting carbon is deposited in the global greenhouse, and we all get warm together. These are the realities of interconnection and interdependence. These are great issues for our future, and these are the issues the Balsillie School is confronting. And you're doing so in the context of remarkable and profound economic, demographic, and environmental changes sweeping the globe on the front pages every day. As you know so well, the center of economic gravity and prosperity is moving from west to east and north to south. Key emerging economies are growing at the rate of 7 to 10% a year, 3, 4, and even 5 times growth rates of the old industrialized West. Recent forecasts suggest that over the next 40 years, the economic share of today's middle-income countries could increase to 60% of the global GDP, double today's 30% share. And this year, 70 million people will be added to the middle class around the world, 2/3 of them in China and India alone. Laced through these rapidly changing economic trends are a bewildering array of new demographic challenges that will also be the focus of your work. For example, when I was born, there were 2 million people on the planet. I was the 2 billionth person, and you can't argue with that or not. I was pretty close. I had number 2 billion. Next month, the global population will pass 7 billion. The tripling of the global population in less than one human lifetime is fundamental to the challenges of the 21st century and to the economic and political stability of modern states. As the world gains another 75 million inhabitants each year, the equivalent of another Chicago every 2 weeks, another Egypt every year, another China every 20 years, 95% of that growth is taking place in the impoverished countries of the developing world, where many nations are struggling to provide jobs, stability, and sustenance for their current population, much less their own rapid growth. Concurrently, demographics are also driving profound changes in the northern developed countries, which are now confronting older populations, altered dependency ratios, shrinking workforces, and the in-migration of millions of people hoping for a new opportunity. Demographic trends are also closely related to the third major factor changing our world, the new and increasingly dangerous relationship between human activities and the Earth's life support systems. The gloomy catalog of looming natural resource challenges is depressingly familiar. Virtually all the essential natural resources, oceans, soils, biodiversity, fresh water, and the atmosphere, are being degraded, depleted, and destroyed. The oceans, which supply protein for 2.5 billion people, are being hammered by overfishing, pollution, and neglect. 80% of the world's fisheries are overexploited and verging on collapse. A mass of plastic particles, 2 times the size of Texas, has accumulated in what is known as the Northern Pacific Ocean Gyre. Dead zones and algae blooms are growing more common in the Pacific Northwest, off the Gulf of Mexico, and elsewhere as a result of accumulating fertilizers, sewage, the disintegration of natural gas products, and other polluting runoff. Freshwater resources are declining globally as aquifers are drawn down faster than they can be replenished and existing supplies are polluted. Major river basins, the Nile, the Yangtze, the Colorado, the Euphrates, for example, are experiencing reduced flows, while major lakes and inland seas are shrinking as well. Land resources at the same time are also in retreat, while deforestation gobbles up 2 million hectares a year. 1/3 of the world's arable land and its valuable topsoil has been degraded or destroyed. And maybe most sensitive, biological diversity, including the globe's rich storehouse of coral reefs and tropical forests, is being lost at a rate 100 times that found in the fossil record. Unchecked, we will lose half the world's biological inheritance in this century, the greatest mass extinction since the age of the dinosaurs. And our atmosphere is being treated like a garbage dump, with vast consequences for every ecosystem and every society. These changes, in turn, are putting new pressures on governance at all levels, and you will be called upon to forge novel solutions and institutions. At the local level, Governments are grappling with issues of urbanization, growing numbers of natural disasters, and insufficient or aging infrastructure. At the national level, many governments are running large debts to finance unsustainable Social Security programs, hold on to jobs, and brace against the forces of global economic integration. And internationally, trade, technology, and telecommunications link the world as never before. World merchandise trade is growing at twice the rate of the world GDP. Cell phones, as we know right here in your backyard, now reach 60% of the world's population. Financial transactions totaling more than $1 trillion wrap around the globe every day. But the promise of financial reform and cooperation, an absolute imperative following the economic crisis of 2008, remains exactly that, a promise. This will continue as one of your great challenges. The place where these challenges are discussed and most solutions are devised remains the United Nations. Meeting as a global community this week, the UN will be addressing the politics of Palestine and the Middle East, and that will grab most of the headlines. But behind the scenes, much other very important work will be done. For example, two major initiatives at the UN in discussion today are the continuing focus on the empowerment of women and their role in development, and the integration of energy and climate policy. Of special importance will be the planning for next year's major international conference, the 20th anniversary of the Earth Summit. In June of 2012, nations will gather in Rio de Janeiro to review progress on the UN Conference on Environment and Development and work together to try to break through the global gridlock and address the world's most important challenge, sustainable development. And Jim Balsillie is on the Secretary General's high-level panel focusing on sustainable development and where we go from here. Sustainable development means striking a sustainable, equitable balance between human numbers and the plant's capacity to support life without robbing future generations. As the debate leading up to Rio makes clear, the biggest obstacle to the pursuit of sustainable development remains the misguided belief that protecting the environment is antithetical to economic interests. We still hear the old bray, quote, "I'm for protecting the environment as long as it doesn't cost jobs." Within this terribly mistaken analysis, we encounter the fundamental intellectual challenge to sustainable development. Over the long term, living off of our ecological capital is a bankrupt economic strategy. Stated in the jargon of the business world, the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. Virtually all economic activity is dependent in some way on the environment and its underlying resource base. When the environment is finally forced to file for bankruptcy under Chapter 11 because its resource base has been polluted, degraded, and irretrievably compromised, then the economy goes down to bankruptcy with it. To avoid stealing from our children's future, we must counter the idea that development comes at the expense of our environment. We must develop new economic models that integrate the two. Sustainable development, as a concept and a very noble one, can serve as a cornerstone of national and international renewal and individual purpose. It can serve as a comprehensive vision for updating the means of international cooperation in this interdependent age. That's why the agenda coming out of Rio and the capabilities of the Balsillie School should focus squarely on two key numbers, 8 billion and 2 degrees. Let me explain. We can't achieve sustainable development unless we know how many of us we are trying to sustain. The UN experts who develop estimates of world population say that we face 3 very different futures. In one of those futures, we grow by another 50 to 60% and reach a population of between 10 and 11 billion people. The second demographic Scenario is a future in which we continue to invest in development as we have been, and the world's population eclipses 9 billion in 2050 before stabilizing. Finally, and most optimistically, we step up to the challenge of sustainability and meet human needs and stabilize population at just under 8 billion in the next 30 years. This third scenario is both feasible and wise. Whether we are talking about prospects for climate change, security, poverty alleviation, equity, or any other aspect of human development, population stabilization at 8 billion will significantly improve humanity's prospects for peace, stability, progress, and some semblance of environmental integrity. Reaching this goal of population stabilization will require concerted efforts to help people receive the information and services they need to determine freely and responsibly the number and spacing of their children. The international community has agreed on a sensible, comprehensive framework that includes making basic health services, particularly reproductive and maternal health services, universally available by 2015. In today's world, more than 200 million women and families want family planning services but cannot get them. This is our first imperative. The second is the empowerment of women, including closing the gender gap in education and ensuring that every child, girls as well as boys, receive primary and secondary education. Reducing maternal mortality by ensuring that every birth occurs with a skilled birth attendant and that every woman has access to emergency obstetric care. Slowing population momentum by assuring that women and girls have educational and economic opportunities and that no child is married at an unsafe age. And increasing child survival so that families have confidence that their children will live. Stabilizing the population at 8 billion, doing all of the things that we know how to do, and packaging them together to have the effect that it will have. Stabilizing the population at 8 billion will also make it much easier for the world to achieve our second major goal for the 21st century, stopping global warming at no more than 2 degrees centigrade. The world's best scientific minds have concluded that warming beyond 2 degrees will likely have catastrophic consequences for the poor, for coastal regions, for agriculture and health, and for political and economic stability. To prevent this kind of future, we need to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions in this decade and significantly roll them back in the coming years until an 80% reduction from 1990 levels is achieved by 2050. Population stabilization provides one of the wedges needed to stabilize climate, but many more wedges must come from energy transformation and the drive to reinvent the global energy system and move toward a low-carbon, clean energy future. We can reduce emissions by transitioning to cleaner burning natural gas and deploying large quantities of clean, renewable energy sources. And most immediately, we can harness energy efficiency, our first fuel, the cheapest, fastest, cleanest energy resource available to us. Massive energy efficient opportunities exist across transportation, building, and industry. At Rio next June, the world will try to agree to set a goal of reducing global energy intensity by 2.5% per year, or 40% by 2030, as recommended by the panel of energy efficiency experts assembled by the Secretary General. The McKinsey & Company Global Institute found that a $170 billion energy investment from now to 2020 could cut projected global energy demand in half and get us halfway to solving the climate crisis. As demographics are the first, holding our global population at 8 billion, transforming the global energy system and preparing for a low-carbon future should be our second major global goal, holding the temperature increase to 2 degrees, 8 and 2. Successfully done, this clean energy economy can decentralize energy generation so all the world's citizens have access to modern energy services. and this can help to slow momentum toward a low-carbon future, which we need. Every day, it's more and more apparent that the great global challenges of the 21st century, from terrorism and proliferation to climate change and poverty, are going to require greater international cooperation. No single government and no single sector is capable of solving these challenges alone. There must be a global partnership, public and private, North and South. New global partnerships help to clear the path to a more peaceful, prosperous, and just world. And that returns us again to the need for a strong, effective United Nations and a thoroughly updated international system. An understanding of demographics is central to your curriculum, just as the complexities of energy and climate are. And at the same time, these will not be possible unless you also attend to our international architecture, especially the UN and its sister institution. The foundations of international cooperation, these institutions, were created almost 60 years ago in the aftermath of World War II, a totally different era. The World Bank, the IMF, the UN, and its subsidiary bodies are all a little frayed today and are due for a significant upgrade to assure 21st century transparency, efficiency, and accountability. Key UN institutions, from established organizations like the UN Population Fund to new ones like UN Energy, are ripe for strengthening. There's much to do, and the leaders of these institutions are eager to work with governments, nonprofit organizations, and the private sector. But reformed international institutions have to be given authority to do their jobs. Their governance also has to be modernized. New global powers must be given the opportunity to play roles of leadership and responsibility. For example, the Security Council has to be expanded. It's a good place to start in terms of strengthening the UN, taking account of the development and clout of such emerging countries as India, Brazil, and South Africa. In this globalized world, governance is designed 60 years ago is neither possible nor wise, and work on these institutional challenges must also be central to your studies here in the Balsillie School. These are all long-term challenges. We know that they must take priority, even as we live in the short term of immediate problems, rapidly changing markets, and the new 24-hour news cycle. In time, we will be judged by our capacity to set aside short-term thinking and recognize and address the real long-term challenges. The advent of this new age and its far-reaching implications present enormous opportunities for the Balsillie School and those fortunate enough to participate in its work and programs. The global issues we face are so compelling and urgent that they will define the rest of your lives and careers. You're the frontiersmen of this entirely new era. Let me close by recalling how some prior pioneers responded to new ideas and perceptions of our globe and our responsibilities to it. In 1948, when the notion of space exploration was still science fiction, the astronomer Fred Hoyle said, quote, "Once a photograph of the Earth taken from the outside is available, new ideas as powerful as any in history will be let loose." 20 years later, when space travel became a reality, the travelers themselves provided powerful testimony to Hoyle's sense of the unity of the world. Let me read you from the American astronaut James Irwin, quote, "That beautiful, warm, living object looked so fragile, so delicate, that if you touched it with a finger, it would crumble and fall apart." And last year, a Russian cosmonaut wrote back, "After an orange cloud formed as a result of a dust storm over the Sahara, reached the Philippines and settled there with rain, I understood that we are all sailing in the same boat." As we enter into the second decade of the new millennium, we have the power and responsibility to captain that boat carefully. And that means taking on the hard issues, the fundamental issues, There is nothing soft or insignificant about the Earth's ailing life support systems. Our changing and challenged atmosphere, oceanic and terrestrial ecosystems demonstrate powerfully that we are indeed all sailing in the same boat, that we can't go it alone, and that international cooperation is in our enlightened self-interest. Thank you all here at the Balsillie School for doing what you are doing to bring the realities of our interdependent age to light, studying them, understanding them, and getting our publics to understand them. That is your part of reaching this great challenge. And thank you for inviting me to be with you this evening. It's an honor and a privilege to be part of this vibrant sanctuary. Thank you very much.